I am Sumita Parmar, professor in the Department of English, Allahabad University. I am also the principal investigator for this paper on the postgraduate course in E-Pathshala on women's studies. Today, I will be talking about postcolonialism and feminist theory. This is part of paper 2, which is on women and literature, and the module is module 35. This module has been written by Professor Asim Siddiqui, who is head of the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. Since about the 90s, postcolonial theory and criticism has had a major impact on literary and social studies. Words like postcolonial studies, postcolonial literature, or postcolonial cinema are frequently encountered. Students of literature, language, social sciences, and law now see their subject in a new light thanks to postcolonial theory. The insights from postcolonial theory are so rich that they illuminate not only the abstract world of our ideas, but also the everyday world of our habits and practices. Thus, how we dress the way we do, how we view things in terms of inferior-superior dichotomy, why we consider some colors and some shapes more important than others, all can be partly explained by postcolonial theory. Let's look at some important terms that you will meet in this area. The basic word in postcolonial is colony. The word colony gives us many more words, namely colonize, colonial, colonizer, colonization, decolonize, and decolonization. In the same way, the prefix post gives us words like postcolonial and postcolonial. The hyphen and no hyphen in this case sometimes suggesting a different range of meanings of words. The colony is seen in relation to the mother country. Thus, if India was the colony of Britain, then Britain was the mother country. If France was the mother country, Algeria was its colony. Colonizers were people in control of the colony. For example, the British and French colonizers. The word colonial is used in conjunction with other words: colonial masters, colonial people, colonial period. The word colonialism can be differentiated from words like imperialism, neocolonialism, and internal colonialism. Colonialism refers to occupation of lands with the significant physical presence of the colonizers, whereas imperialism is more a term of ideology in which the actual presence of colonizers in the colony may not be necessary, but the colony, especially its economy, may still be controlled by the imperial power. Although colonialism may well be over, imperialism continues to define relationships between independent nations. The cry of globalization, with its important agencies like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, help the cause of imperialism in subtle ways. New colonialism, or new NEW colonialism, is used as a synonym of imperialism. the word neo suggesting the hidden nature of colonialism, in which the oppressive presence of colonizers is not noticed by the colonial people, but their lives are nevertheless affected by the processes of imperialism. Decolonization refers to a particular phase in history when a number of countries started winning their independence from powerful colonial powers like Britain and France. Many of these countries, mostly from Asia and Africa, achieved their independence after 1940. However, the word decolonization is also used to refer to the shedding of many colonial practices, beliefs and habits, a process not easily accomplished. As such, decolonization of the mind is an ongoing process and is very complex in nature. Internal colonialism refers to nationalism acting like colonialism and applying force to control its own people. It is a known fact of our world that many religious, racial and ethnic groups, often facing discrimination, seek some form of independence from the dominant power in their land. In turn, they are ruled by force, and the power relationships between the two unequal groups makes integration of the country a difficult proposition. Let us look at the theory and some of the theorists in this area. History bears out that where there is power, there is resistance. The questions of power and resistance provide two different directions to post-colonial theory. Among the figures who have focused their attention on resistance are the names of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi and Algerian writer and revolutionary Frantz Fanon. Gandhi's concept of non-violence, his use of religious spiritual vocabulary, his idea of renunciation, and his radical critique of Western civilization provide an interesting narrative in post-colonial theory. Fannin, on the other hand, was no votary of non-violence. A psychoanalyst by training and a revolutionary by conviction, he is a major presence in post-colonial theory. Fannin's two influential books, Black Skins, White Masks and The Wretched of the Earth, focus on the effects of colonialism on the colonized people. The effect of the gaze of the colonizers turns the colonized from subject to object. What Fannin painfully learnt was that his identity was being made by somebody else. It was the white man who was defining his identity. In the process, he ceased to be a man like other men and became an object instead. However, the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978 is generally considered to be the key moment in the history of post-colonial studies. Said's book, Orientalism, was a major influence on the study of marginality, a fact affirmed by no less a critic than Gayatri Spivak, who, along with Indian critic Homi K. Bhabha, are the other important names in post-colonial theory. In his book Culture and Imperialism, Said addressed the issue of resistance. He introduced the post-colonial concept of contrapuntal reading of texts. Contrapuntal reading takes into account both processes of imperialism and of resistance. Said's reading of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, in which he uncovers the novel's relationship to colonies and the empire, is a classic example of contrapuntal reading. Marxist critic Azad Emmett has especially been a very bitter critic of Said. He has criticized him for not sufficiently highlighting the issue of resistance in his account. Another book that had a substantial impact in the area of post-colonial studies is The Empire Writes Back by Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffith, and Helen Triffin. Now let's look at post-colonialism, nationalism, and the woman question. The main idea that united people in their battle for independence against the colonial rule was the concept of nationalism. Related to the phase of industrialization and imperialism, the concept of nation is of a fairly recent origin and is the concern of a great number of post-colonial poets, novelists, critics, and theorists. The concept of nationalism has also been critiqued from a number of perspectives. The narrative of the freedom struggle has often been presented in patriarchal terms and in terms of motherhood. And the contribution of women to the freedom struggle and to the process of decolonization has not been sufficiently acknowledged. Let's look at the connection between post-colonialism and feminism. Both feminism and post-colonialism are concerned with the question of marginality. And both feminism and post-colonialism are oppositional discourses. That is, they have an enemy. They display a tone of anger and an acute sense of historical wrong, and they demand a new historiography. When feminism first made its appearance in the humanities and the social sciences, the relationship between feminism and post-colonialism, which became an academic subject in the 90s, exposed many blind spots in the two perspectives. To criticism, feminism perceived through the post-colonial lens appeared divided and vulnerable, while on the other hand, feminism pointed to many gaps in post-colonial theory. The well-known post-colonial critic Leila Gandhi identifies three areas of controversy which fracture the potential unity between post-colonialism and feminism. These are: 1, the debate surrounding the figure of the third world woman; 2, the feminist as imperialist; and 3, finally, the colonialist deployment of feminist criteria to bolster the appeal of the civilizing mission. John McLeod offers another perspective as he summarizes the feminist critique of nationalism offered by Floya Anthias and Neera Yuval Davis in their book Woman, Nation, State. According to them, women appear in 5 major ways in nationalist discourses. 1, as reproducers of the boundaries of ethnic national groups. 2, as biological reproducers of members of ethnic collectivities. 3, as participating centrally in the ideological reproduction of the collectivity and as transmitters of its culture. as signifiers of ethnic national differences, and finally, as participants in national, economic, political, and military struggles. Ronica Bonnie's book, Imperial Fictions, Myths of Orient, argues how the Eastern woman, as she appears in the genre of travel writing, is an object of lust who arouses desire. Colonialism and patriarchy combine forces to turn her into an exotic figure. Interestingly, she is not any different in the writings of Western women travelers. In fact, Western women writers were equally guilty of perpetuating colonial patriarchal attitudes towards the Orient. The debate surrounding the Third World woman has generated a lot of controversy. The category of Third World woman has been attacked for 1. Its ethnocentric bias, 2. for hiding racial prejudices, and 3. for stabilizing an old hierarchy in new Orientalist terms. As the First World refers to Europe and the United States of America, the Third World refers to countries in Asia and Africa. Said's Orientalism has established that the First World, in most Western accounts, is enlightened, liberated, democratic, and rational, and the Third World is just its opposite. Since postcolonial studies generated a lot of academic interest in the concept of marginality, the figure of the Third World woman appeared to epitomize the very concept of marginality for Western feminists. She was doubly colonized. However, there are problems in the notion of double colonization, as critics like Trinity Minha, Chandra Talpade Mohanty, and Gayatri Spivak have argued. The Third World woman becomes an object which serves the intellectual and discursive interests of Western feminism. She becomes a monolithic category, a subject of study, and a site for creating knowledge. She becomes an interesting figure because she possesses an otherness which Western feminism demands. She holds the promise of a permanent supply of alterity, otherness, for an all too adventurous Western feminism. The relationship between imperialism and Western feminism has been probed by critics like Gayatri Spivak. In her incisive and truly post-colonial reading of Jane Eyre, entitled Three Women's Texts and a Critique of Imperialism, Spivak finds problems in these classic texts at the level of narrative and representation. Jane Eyre can be celebrated in Western feminism for exercising agency, for making her choices, and for her feminism only by suppressing a Creole woman's voice in the novel. That Bertha Mason, the Creole woman, is imprisoned in her house, and she has to die for Jane to marry Edward Rochester, reveals the novel's complicity in the imperial project. Western feminism is here blamed for denying agency and the power of representation to the native woman. What is more important, the freedom and emancipation of women or the fight against colonialism? In our discussion of nationalist discourses, we briefly discussed the patriarchal bias in nationalism. Thus, many champions of nationalism were actually indifferent to the lot of the native woman. However, when the colonial masters tried to talk about reform, they were greatly perturbed. Any effort by the colonial masters to introduce reforms in societal affairs affecting Indian women was considered an interference and was met with a lot of resistance. In his famous work, The Nation and Its Fragments, Partha Chatterjee refers to the nationalists' tendency to divide culture into the material and the spiritual sphere. Leila Gandhi aptly sums up Chatterjee's argument. In her words, she says, while it was deemed necessary to cultivate and imitate the material accomplishments of Western civilization, it was compulsory to simultaneously preserve and police the spiritual properties of national culture. And in the catalogue of the nation's spiritual effects, the home and its keeper acquired a troublesome preeminence. It must be mentioned that feminism has provided imagery and motives to many political movements in India, both before and after independence. Gandhi's act of spinning, as Robert Young says, was a traditionally female activity, as the term spinster suggests. In fact, Gandhi saw himself not only as both a Hindu and Muslim, but also as both a man and a woman. His androgyny was a protest against the macho colonial aggression. Even his doctrine of non-violence formed the basis of relations between men and women on terms of equality. The concept of non-violence, together with his vegetarianism, also provided a basis for what would later be known as ecofeminism. A more concrete example of ecofeminism is provided by the Chipko movement, which began in the early 70s. In the Chamoli district in present-day Uttarakhand, the movement got its name from women hugging and embracing of trees to resist their cutting and felling. One important strand in postcolonial theory is the colonization of nature. The cutting of trees, the destruction of the flora and fauna of the colonized land, and the planting of new trees for economic gains are all aspects of this colonization of nature. The contribution of women to the Chipko movement and also to some recent movements like the Narmada Bachao Andolan has played a role in defining the nature of ecofeminism in India. Famous campaigners like Medha Patikar, Arundhati Roy, and Vandana Shiva are important names in these campaigns against deforestation and what they call maldevelopment. Thank you.